Before we dive in, hit the subscribe button for more expert insights and honest conversations on Raising Mama podcast. Listen to the full episode at the link in the description.
One of the more common questions is prenatal vitamins or, folate versus folic acid. And that's a big question. I think my first post on January 1st was you don't need supplements. And, they can help. They can help filling gaps in a healthy diet, but you don't need supplements. However, they can definitely help, especially bridging the gap and holes in the diet. For example, folate has the same root word as foliage. It comes from leafy greens. So you can get it from that, great. If you can't, or if you're in a food desert, or you're in a place where the soil is depleted and you're not getting it, you can take folate. It's better than folic acid because it's more natural. There's a lot that goes in behind the scenes, but it doesn't accumulate. So that's a big question. Particularly folate, because pregnancy is so metabolically active. You're creating an entire life from scratch. You're creating a new organ, the placenta, from scratch. Your blood volume goes up a couple liters, your blood pressure goes up, your insulin resistance, so to speak, goes up because now baby's taken all that sugar that it needs. And so you start using fat a little bit more, so your body starts to adapt. And so that's why you can see now, the quality of nutrition and diet that we have makes such a difference, because you can have, a lot of food of poor quality and you don't get the necessary micronutrients in the food, even if you're getting, sufficient proteins. Protein's a little, less. The micronutrients will come more from the stuff that doesn't necessarily make it into the macronutrients as much, like veggies, stuff like that, like, the folate and foliage. Leafy greens, fiber is incredibly important. And so the quality of food matters. When you're making a baby and you're making a placenta and you're making all this new blood and you're making all this new tissue, you need the materials to do it. And so a good quality diet and supplements can help kind of fill that gap. Typically, there's a lot of actually really interesting science that shows that cravings are tightly related to what it is that you're missing, which is why sometimes you get these weird cravings. You're like, why am I all of a sudden craving this thing? It's very likely that something or some ingredient in that food is something that you're actually lacking. It's really fascinating stuff. It's not really solid yet. I'd love to say, yeah, it's been proven. It's fascinating. I'm sure, as it's one of the limitations of research, is the only research that gets done is what was funded, which is kind of another one of the ones that, the research for pregnant women is just like glaringly lacking, despite the fact that a woman's body is significantly more complex because of that whole process than men's. Men get a lot more research dedicated to things that go on in the male body, which is significantly more simple. Probably one that the brain shrinks during pregnancy in synaptic pruning is what it's called. It's basically like the brain is starting to prepare for the importance of taking care of that baby. And to do that, you have to start getting rid. You only have so much bandwidth. You have to start getting rid of things that aren't as important. Again, oversimplifying a little bit, things like social and, things that maybe are, great in a dinner party, but skills that we don't need as much since we're going to be dedicating all of our time to the baby. The actual synapse, that, synaptic pruning, almost like pruning a tree. Like I think I described it as like a haircut. You end up with less hair, but if you trim off what you don't want, you're actually happier with the final product. It's not really a palpable or tangible thing, but, neither is mom brain, which is crazy that that's almost used as a pejorative. Like, it's just like this wonderfully complex neurological thing that's happening, and it's just dismissed as mom brain, which I think if we were to take any one of the many, many things that a mom goes through in preparing for the baby in pregnancy or after, we will never, as guys, appreciate or fathom what it takes. I know if I were subjected to the sleep deprivation that my wife was, I'd be clinically insane by this point. Very likely it could take something like up to 2 years for that to start to recover, but not that it recovers in the sense that it's reversed. It's just kind of permanent. Once you're a mom, you're always a mom. And then, like you were saying, the mom brain, it's kind of ridiculous when you hear, and these are kind of horror stories, but when you hear guys that get frustrated with either their pregnant, girlfriend or wife, or, once the baby's born, they're like, all right, time to, get back to your old body. I was like, there is no old body. There is, and I know it's obviously coming from a guy that's kind of, it can be discouraging. Yeah, it's called subcutaneous fat, which just means under the skin, which is, if you're at 0% body fat, you're dead. So you need body fat. It's just, and it's actually a remarkable tool that our body's able to store energy, so we don't have to be walking from bush to bush, packing on berries and finding an animal to eat. We actually have the ability to store fat. So that's a good thing. The downside is when we have 30, 40% of our body's fat, we have way more energy than we're ever going to use. So it's actually playing on hormones. Subcutaneous fat, you're totally right, doesn't have nearly as much to do with health as something like visceral fat, which is kind of the intra-organ fat, or or ectopic fat, which is actually like in the organs. So there are a lot of things that, it's much healthier to have subcutaneous fat than it is visceral, or, the in with the organs. You don't want that. And that's typically a result of poor health. So, because it serves a purpose. Like you were saying, well, why is my weight not dropped? Well, if you're breastfeeding, you have several pounds between the milk and the tissue that supports it that is not going to go away, and you don't want it to go away. You'd have to really be worried about the number on the scale to sacrifice something that's, as good a design as, specifically holding that so as to feed the baby. It's worth the wait.